Hi, welcome back. It's been a whole year since I've posted a video. The last video on this channel was a book video, and now it's the new year. It's time for another book video. So happy 2023. January is almost over. Well, when this is going up, so a little bit late to the party, but we're here. We made it. A lot of things happened in 2022. 2022 was a great year. A lot of changes, a lot of great things. Most importantly, though, I read 34 books, and I'm excited to talk about it. So today's format is going to be a little bit different than last year's video. Instead of having me ramble on about each book that I read, I'm just gonna show you all the books that I read in one screen, and you can look at that. And then we're gonna go through our stats. And also new this year is I've finally been informed on what Storygraph is, the website that you can put all your books into, and then it calculates all the stats and fancy pretty graphs for you. And that saved me a lot of time and energy. So amazing things this year. So we're just gonna get right into it with the 34 books I read this year. I'm gonna be looking down at my screen here. This is where I'm gonna be looking at it. But I'm sure I'll put it up on the screen for you to see as well. So I read 34 books. According to Storygraph, 13,138 pages. The category I read the most of was adventure, which is a pretty broad category. I would say most of the books I read can fall under adventure, sure. And this year was actually interesting because I kind of played catch up a little bit. I read a lot of the books that most people read when they were a kid or when they were in high school. So I read most of the Narnia series this year. I also read Hunger Games series, and I read the Harry Potter series, which are all things I feel like most people read when they were kids/teenagers, but I didn't. The only trendy book series I read when I was in high school was Twilight. So I caught myself up. Now I'm on the same page as everybody. So a lot of these stats are filled with Harry Potter and Hunger Games. So some of the adventure books I read, Mockingjay, all the Harry Potters, True Grit. I read Dune, the Narnia books, Jurassic Park, Three Musketeers. I did reread Three Musketeers this year. That was a book I read for the first time last year. It was an all-time favorite. I reread it this year, and I still loved it. Under the Whispering Door, some O. Henry, Wizard of Oz. And then the next biggest category I read was mysterious with 14 books, which makes sense. I gravitate towards thriller and horror and kind of weird books, so mysterious makes sense. Mysterious is different from mystery, though, because I read a lot of mysterious books, but not mystery detective. So, Local Woman Missing, The Woman in the Window, My Heart is a Chainsaw, The Cuckoo's Calling, which is the mystery book that I read this year, Jane Eyre, This Thing Between Us, Pearl. Those are mysterious books, apparently. And then the third biggest category is dark. Hunger Games, Reprieve is on there, A House at the Bottom of the Lake. That's so fun. Look at that graph. Cool. Apparently only read 2 informative things and 2 lighthearted things. Apparently a lot of dark reading, but pace. This is an interesting graph. I don't know exactly what it's referring to when it means pace. Like, does it mean on how fast I read it, or does it mean on the pace of the plot of the book? Regardless, most of the stuff I read was medium paced, and then fast, and then a little bit of slow. For page numbers, most of what I read was between 300 and 499, which is pretty average. And then a large chunk was less than 300, which makes sense. And then a pretty good chunk was 500 plus. And that's because I read the Harry Potter series, and the end of that series is like at least 800 page book. So some big books this year. Dune and Three Musketeers is a big boy as well. I'm pretty happy with the amount of 500 plus books I read. 500 plus page books I read. And then I read mostly fiction. I read 2 nonfiction. Most read genre was fantasy, which makes sense because fantasy's pretty broad. A lot of things can fall under fantasy. And then I read a lot of classics. And then because of the catching up I was doing with Hunger Games, Narnia, and Harry Potter, I had way more young adult, middle grade, and children's books than I usually do. I don't usually read young adult, and middle grade and children obviously don't generally appeal to me as an adult woman. And then horror and thriller, which is normal. Like I said, I tend towards those genres. Those are my favorite genres. That's my favorite movie genre as well. So, yep, that all checks out. That's cool. I like that. Most read authors was, of course, because of the series, J.K. Rowling, C.S. Lewis, and Suzanne Collins. However, the one that sticks out the most to me on here is Josh Malerman, because those weren't series. Turns out I pick up Josh Malerman. I mean, it's only 2 books. Yeah, it's only 2 books, which was Pearl and A House at the Bottom of a Lake. But that's fun to see for me because I don't follow authors. I don't have a favorite author. You know, I don't pick up books just because of the author. I pick up books when they interest me. So it's cool that I read 2 Josh Malerman, and I liked both. I'll look for Josh Malerman now and maybe pick up books because it's Josh Malerman. Which is kind of interesting. And then my favorite graph is the books read to pages read ratio throughout the year. So, like I've said, my reading varies a lot. I read for fun. My reading can fluctuate based on month to month, based on how busy I am. Like in February, I read 6 books in February. Don't know what happened, but I read 6 books in February and 2,017 pages. That's a crazy amount. But in September, October, I only read 1 book each month. Like, for some reason, I don't know what happened those months. I was really busy, I guess, but I only read 1 book. But in my defense, those books were both 800 pages, so you could count that as 2 400-page books. But anyway, I only read 1 book those months, and then some months I read up to 6, apparently, so it just depends. But those are all the stats for the Storygraph website, and I also want to take a look at my Goodreads stats. So in my Goodreads app, I have the same books tracked, obviously. Goodreads is the app I use on a day-to-day basis when I'm tracking my reading. So 34 books. For some reason, Goodreads tracks 13,345 pages. It probably has something to do with different editions that were saved. I don't really know, but I read over 13,000 pages this year, roughly. The shortest book I read was a nonfiction, and then the longest book I read was a Harry Potter book. My average book length, 392 pages. And yeah, that's all the books I read right there. Wow, look at them all. That's all the books. That's all the stats that I have for Storygraph and Goodreads. What I would like to note, though, is so I keep a journal. I have a journal for the first half of the year and the second half of the year. And I keep everything in here, okay? I record a lot of things in here. I keep a lot of stats and records about a lot of things in my life in here. So I love keeping track of if I read that day and how many pages I read that day. So I'll probably do a little flip through of some of the spreads in here so you can take a look to see if you're interested on how I do that and what that looks like. But according to those records, I read 306 days out of 365 in 2022. And that's pretty cool. I'm really happy with that. That's like an 84% percentage rate of reading. I'm happy with that. What was also interesting to note, so like I said, I have a journal for the first half of the year, so the first 6 months, and then a journal for the second 6 months. And each month I'm keeping track of what day I read, what day I didn't read. What's interesting to note is that in the first 6 months of the year, I read 153 days. And then also in the second 6 months of the year, I read 153 days again. So that's weird. Don't know what that means, but it's just a fun fact for you. So that's some of the stats from my journals here. Now that we've looked at all the statistics from my reading in 2022, I'd like to talk about some of my favorite books this year. And by favorite books, I mean favorite book, because I have one favorite. I enjoyed most of what I read this year. I would say I'm overall really satisfied with the reading I did this year. But one book sticks out. One book is going on my reread shelf, and that is Jane Eyre. It was a good book. I really enjoyed it. It had what I needed in it. And some people in my life claim that this book is boring. Some people in my life claim that this book is boring, and my question is, did you read it? Did you read it? Did you really read it? Because it's not boring. It's not boring. But I love this book, and it's definitely going on my reread shelf. And I only have a handful of books on my reread shelf. So I have Little Women, Anne of Green Gables, and then Three Musketeers, which I read last year and reread this year. So I've already done my reread for this, and I'm actually planning on rereading it again this year, probably in March, maybe, if I can wait that long. It's just a good book. It's a good book. If you watched last year's video, I raved about this book. It's a great book. So favorite book of the year, Jane Eyre. But like I said, I liked a lot of the books I read this year. I really enjoyed the Harry Potter series. I thought it was really good. Every book I enjoyed. It's easy to read. As opposed to the other series I read, the Hunger Games series, I liked the first book, Hunger Games. Here, I'll hold it up for you. Hunger Games, I liked Hunger Games. I thought it was good, but Catching Fire and Mockingjay went downhill for me. They were not nearly as good as the first one. So there's that. Some other standout ones were probably, I wouldn't say standout as in favorite. I don't rate my books, except for like Jane Eyre, I would say is a 5-star, and Three Musketeers, I would say is a 5-star. But I don't rate them. I can tell you if I liked it or didn't like it, and I can tell you why, but I'm not good at putting a numerical value out of 5 to that reasoning. Another book that I remember that I think back on fondly was probably Pearl. It's just a telepathic evil pig, and that's weird, and I enjoyed it. And then another book that I really liked, which was a short story, Josh Malerman. I like Josh Malerman, apparently. Was another my other Josh Malerman, A House at the Bottom of the Lake. This was good, and it had the right amount of weird. I can get down with some weird, like, what the heck, we don't know what's going on, and this did it well. And it's short. I think it's a perfect length. So this was really good. I like this a lot. Creepy vibes, you don't know what's going on. This did it well. Now, on the flip side, some of my least favorite books of the year, This Thing Between Us. Now, like I said, I can get down with weird. I can get down with I don't know what's going on, really. But this book, I don't think did it as well. This book was about a man dealing with grief and loss of the sudden death of his wife. But then all of a sudden it gets weird. And not just like you don't know what's going on, it gets supernatural weird, like really quick and really hardcore, and it just kind of didn't work for me. It didn't work for me. And then it just ends and you're left like, what the heck just happened? And not in a good way. Whereas this book, it ends and you're like, what the heck just happened? But you kind of like it, in my opinion, at least. So one of my least favorite books was this book. And then, unfortunately, another least favorite, I would have to say, is The Selected Stories of O. Henry. Because it's a collection of short stories, there's so many short stories in here, and I only enjoyed 10 of them. Out of this 400-page book, I only enjoyed 10 of the short stories. So it's hard to rate a collection of short stories. I'd have to say this was low on the list, because thinking back to when I was reading it, I just remember being like, are we done yet? No, we're not. So unfortunately this was, don't get me wrong, there are 10 stories in here that I like, but in terms of like, Henry as a whole, I wouldn't say he's a favorite. But then everything else kind of falls in the middle, and like I said, nothing's in a particular order. Everything else kind of falls in there somewhere of best to worst in some order. But I say least favorite loosely. I didn't hate anything that I read. Like I said, I enjoyed most of what I read. But, there's got to be some on the top and there's got to be some on the bottom. And those are the ones that fell on the bottom. So now that we've talked about the stats, we've talked about some of the books a little bit more in detail, I want to talk about some of my reading goals for 2023. I'm very excited going into the new year for a lot of reasons. But in terms of my reading specifically, I actually have 4 goals this year. Normally, I have a numerical reading goal just to keep myself on track with reading consistently. But this year, I do have a numerical reading goal, but I also have 3 other goals to go with it. So my numerical reading goal for 2023 is 30 books. And you might be thinking, why 30? You read 34 last year. You should set your goal higher than what you achieved last year. And you're probably right. And I do hope I beat 34. But the thing is, I don't like to set at least my reading goal to something super high, because I read for fun. That's all this is. It's for fun. And I want to be able to read and enjoy it. And if I'm not reading and not enjoying it, I'm not going to do it. So I don't like to put so much pressure on reading a bunch of books. And so my reading goal is 30. Last year's 24. So that was 2 books a month, and I definitely crushed that. My second goal is to read more nonfiction. So last year I only read 2 nonfiction books. This year I would like to read more nonfiction. I just feel like 2023 is the year for my brain, all right? This year I'm going to absorb knowledge, and I want the knowledge, right? So I want to read, and I want to do that in the form of nonfiction reading. And I'm not talking about self-help books or business book. I'm talking like historical nonfiction is my goal. And I don't have like a specific set amount of nonfiction. I just want to, search for nonfiction books that will actually interest me and read them. And I want to do that more actively than I did last year. And then my third goal is to write about what I read. So like I said, I keep a journal, and most of my life goes into that journal. And for the setup of my new journal this year, I set aside a chunk in the back to record the book I read and give myself a little bit of space to write about what I read. And just like my other goals, it's really lenient. It's not like I have to write 2 pages or I have to write this or whatever. I just want to have space where I can put my thoughts about the book down, because sometimes I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about the books I read, but nobody cares. Because nobody's reading the books I'm reading. So I have to put them down because I don't want to forget them. It also helps a lot with reading comprehension. So I want to, goal 3, write about what I read. And then my fourth and final goal is a weird one for me. It kind of ties in with some of my non-reading related goals. My fourth goal is to buddy read a book this year. And the only time I've ever read a book with somebody else has been in high school English class. So this year I would like to read a book with somebody. And that's going to be a challenge, because I'm going to have to identify that human being to read with. And then we're going to have to pick a book that we both are going to be hopefully interested in. And then we're going to have to read it together in some form, and then we're gonna have to discuss it, and that's gonna be a challenge for me, but I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to it, and it's a goal I have this year. So, and it's a loose goal, all right? I want to buddy read at least 1 book with someone this year. That's it. Those are all my reading goals. So those are all my stats. That's a glimpse at all the books I read this year. We talked about my favorite books, my least favorite books, and we talked about my reading goals for 2023. I'm very excited to get into 2023. And like I said, it's the end of January when I'm filming this, so I've actually already started my 2023 reads. If you want a sneak peek, the first book I read this year was Death in Her Hands, and I've already read this small collection of H.P. Lovecraft Gothic tales. This only has 3 in it. It's very, very small. And I just started, the next book I'm reading is The Last House on Needless Street. So this is the book I'm currently reading at the time of filming this video. So that's a little sneak peek into next year's book vlog. Hopefully that's not going to be the next time I post a video. Another one of my goals is to post more videos. So hopefully the next time you see me will not be my 2023 reading stats. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's my 2022 reading in a nutshell. If you have any comments or thoughts about any of the books I read, I'd love to talk about it. I love talking books, discussing books. I love doing that. So feel free to let me know what your thoughts are about it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of this. I hope 2023 has treated you well so far. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later. Goodbye.